Hello and welcome to DNET, the Disability Network. I'm Bill McQueen.
And I'm Ming Wong. In a moment, we'll take a look at two recent court decisions that dealt with crucial issues that affect people with disabilities. One ruling in Alberta focused on eugenics laws that led to sterilizations in the 1950s. The other ruling in Ontario brings us to the present and into the future. That case is based on more recent legal concepts such as wrongful life. Later on the show, we'll look at some of the far-reaching implications of these legal cases.
Also in today's show, we'll meet someone who is combining his love of travel with a prospective career. First, here are some highlights of disability stories from the last few weeks. Last week, an Alberta court decided that the province must pay Leilani Muir $750,000 because she was wrongfully sterilized. In 1959, Muir was told that she was having her appendix removed when in fact she was being sterilized. Kelly Crow reported on the decision for CBC.
Oh, Lord, what am I doing?
Leilani Muir ventured reluctantly back into the spotlight today.
I'm glad it's over with, let's put it that way.
After a 6-year battle, an Alberta court has awarded her the maximum in damages for pain and suffering. 37 years ago, she was wrongfully sterilized without her knowledge. She's happy about the settlement, but she says it doesn't right the wrong.
No amount of money could ever make up for what I went through and what I will go through till the day I die. Because that hurt is there always.
Muir was sterilized while living in this provincial institution in the late 50s. The doctors said they were removing her appendix. She was one of more than 2,000 Albertans who suffered under the old Alberta eugenics law, aimed at purifying the human race by getting rid of what the law called mental defectives. Elizabeth McCormick was also sterilized under that law. She's one of more than 28 people who are also suing the Alberta government.
I'm hoping it'll turn out good for me.
Premier Ralph Klein says the Justice Department is investigating whether to appeal the Muir decision and what to do about the other cases.
It could be very expensive, and it's sad, you know, that these kinds of things took place back in the 50s.
Leilani Muir says the government should pay in every case.
They were playing God with our lives. No, they had no rights, so yeah, let them play. And the way I look at it, until hell freezes over, I don't care.
The judge had harsh words for the government of the day, calling Muir's sterilization high-handed and contemptuous. Muir, meanwhile, says she would still like an official apology for all of that from this government.
A judge in Ontario has dismissed a lawsuit against a Windsor hospital for allowing a child to be born. Sarah Mickle was born without limbs on the right side of her body. Her parents, Kelly and David Mickle, were suing for $21 million in damages. An ultrasound didn't show that Sarah would have the disability. Justice John Jennings dismissed the claim for wrongful life. The judge agreed with the defense that the claim would force the courts to assess the worth of a quote-unquote less than perfect life as opposed to no life at all. The courts still have to hear the mother's claim for wrongful birth. That case is expected to proceed in the fall. Many disabilities are caused by car accidents. One of the most common and controversial is whiplash. For some people, the effects can be severe and long-lasting. Researchers in Saskatchewan are looking into the many questions surrounding this condition. Terry Goodmanson reports from Regina.
All kinds of injuries result from car accidents, but the most common is whiplash. And unlike broken bones, so-called soft tissue injuries are hard to detect and even harder to cure. That's why SGI is funding research at the University of Saskatchewan.
We have to stop people from developing into chronic conditions.
The Saskatchewan study is just beginning, but 4 years ago, a similar study took place in Quebec. David Cassidy took part in that study, and now he's heading up the one in Saskatchewan, a study which could dramatically change whiplash treatment.
A poor approach to managing most whiplash would be to put someone in a collar, in a soft collar, and tell them not to move their neck, and tell them to stay off work, and to warn them that they have a serious injury.
Cassidy says the new philosophy is to treat whiplash aggressively, to get patients to move their necks as soon as possible. Borden Bashinsky is an orthopedic specialist. Bashinsky says fractures aside, whiplash is really a neck sprain, and should be treated like any other sprain.
Would you strap an ankle? Yes, I would. Would I give them a collar? Yes, I would. If they're in pain, they've got the support. It's a support. It's a splint. If you've got a sprained neck, you'd be grateful you have a collar.
Controversy also lingers over the best rehabilitation method.
With respect to some of the other treatments like massage therapy and ultrasound and some of the other more classical treatments, we found very little evidence at all that any of those treatments were effective.
Susan Giles is a licensed massage therapist. She says there is no proof that massage doesn't work.
I guess the best evidence that we have is the testimonials of the people that we treat. When the injury is healing, there's scar tissue forming, and massage therapists can do very gentle massage and help that scar tissue line up properly so that it's not going to be restricting later on.
Despite the controversy, the objective of the Saskatchewan study is to determine who will have long-term problems. That may have helped Dave Tokar. Tokar had a whiplash in 1982. He tried physiotherapy and chiropractic treatments, but said they only provided him with temporary relief. Then the headaches began.
And I was taking them aspirins and pills to kill the pain, and wouldn't help. I had to go see the doctor and had to get a shot, and that's when I found out that this headache was being caused by the whiplash that I had received.
In the end, there are lots of people who suffer symptoms for many years after. Whether it's caused by inappropriate treatment or the severity of injury can only be determined by more research.
Statistics Canada has recently released revised reports on designated groups covered by the Federal Employment Equity Program. The report predicts an increase in workplace participation for people with disabilities. It forecasts the numbers to increase from 1.9 million in 1993 to 2.1 million by the year 2016. In 1993, almost 7% of the working population had disabilities. The number is expected to rise to 8% by the year 2016. The biggest jump is expected to be amongst workers between 45 and 65 years old. That's this week's Roundup of Disability Stories.
When we come back, a detailed look at two significant court rulings. How far-reaching are the decisions in the Leilani Muir case and the wrongful life case?
This program is brought to you in part by the Royal Bank of Canada, serving Canadians for 126 years, one customer at a time. As we saw earlier in the program, two judges have made significant rulings that have implications for people with disabilities. In Alberta, Leilani Muir won a court battle with the provincial government. Muir is one of almost 3,000 people who were sterilized under a eugenics law that was in effect between 1928 and 1972. And in Windsor, a judge dismissed a lawsuit filed by the parents of a disabled girl. David and Kelly Mickles filed a wrongful life suit on behalf of their daughter, Sarah. She was born without limbs on her right side. Her parents say they would have aborted her had the hospital test detected her disability. The judge said the case could not proceed because it was impossible to measure Sarah's life with a disability against not being born at all. This was the first time a ruling was made in a wrongful life suit. Earlier, Ing spoke with Marcia Ryu, Executive Director of the Rohr Institute, about the implications of these cases.
Leilani Muir recently won a landmark case against the Alberta provincial government for wrongfully sterilizing her. What does this decision ultimately mean for people with disabilities?
I think it's a really important decision, I guess for three reasons, and I think the judge outlined all three of them in the case. First, because she was sterilized, which is an affront to her dignity by any definition of that situation. Secondly, because she was labeled a moron, which in itself is such a stigma for a person to spend their life with. And thirdly, because she was incarcerated in an institution. And I think all three of those things, which are probably still continuing, are things which are really an affront to people's dignity.
Does this make people with disabilities more equal in the eyes of the law now?
Oh, I think it does for sure, and I think the judge's indignation is really interesting because it may be the first case in which we've actually had a judge in Canada who recognized the absolute and blatant abuse of people with intellectual disabilities in this country to that extent.
Why was this particular practice of sterilizing people with intellectual disabilities so popular at the time?
There was an assumption that people with intellectual disabilities, if they reproduced, would in fact have children who also had intellectual disabilities. In the first place, that's not actually correct. There are very few cases in which disability is a result of genetics. But even if that isn't the case, I think there was and still is an enormous stigma attached to disability and attached particularly to intellectual disability. And there were a number of ways in which people wanted to supposedly cleanse the population of this group of people.
How close were we historically to Nazi Germany?
Historically, the first group of people that they decided to eliminate when they started the Holocaust were in fact people with disabilities. I think it's also the case that Nazi Germany, in fact, came and looked at the sterilization laws in Canada when they were looking for a model of setting up those laws in Germany. So we're not so far away in some cases. Those laws have been, both those laws have been withdrawn in Canada. But I think when we look at some of the new genetic research and some of the discussions that are going on in terms of which conditions we're looking for in genetic research, that we may be very close to where we were in Nazi Germany. It seems to me we ought to be very carefully monitoring and very carefully controlling both the genome research and its application.
Let's move on to another case now where a Windsor judge dismissed a suit by parents of a very young disabled girl. They had sued the hospital for wrongful life. What do you think that decision means to people with disabilities?
Well, again, I think it's important. Had they not chosen to throw out that case, and in fact, those cases have not been successful in the United States either. I think if they hadn't thrown out the decision, it would have made a statement that I think would have been a very ethically problematic statement. To suggest that one is better off to not to have existed than to be born and live with a disability is a very troubling kind of decision.
This case has wide-ranging implications. What kind of message is it going to send out to the community?
I think it says that that just doesn't make sense in any kind of logical way we can think about that. But I think it's common. I think it's not unusual, for instance, for people to say that we should get rid of, for instance, genetic causes of disability because being born with a disability is so undesirable. I don't think people with disabilities think that. I think there are people who certainly have lesser chances in life, who, for example, are black in our society. We know that. We know that women don't earn as much as men for the same kinds of jobs in our society. There are all kinds of ways in which people are disadvantaged because of social structures, which are the same reasons people with disabilities are disadvantaged, but it doesn't make life not worth living.
Now, these two cases have been very prominent in the media. How are they linked?
I think they're both linked in the sense that both of them start with a premise that we'd rather not have people with disabilities in the society. And I think that the much more important message, the opposite message, and certainly the one in the case, the sterilization case, is that in fact that isn't what we want. We want a society with the diversity. We want a society with people with all kinds of abilities. We don't want to start eliminating people prior to birth because of the possibility of disability.
Well, I'd like to thank you for joining us today.
Thanks very much.
When we return, how one man is working to change the tourism and travel industry from within.
At this time of year, many people are inclined to head south, lay on the beach, and soak up the sun. Others may want to travel to Europe or beyond. To get there and to find a place to stay, you need to make many arrangements. Quite often, the trip runs much more smoothly if you can find an experienced travel agent to help with the details. That's if you can find a travel agent who understands your needs.
Access to travel and transportation is improving, but there's another link between the traveler and the destination: the travel agent.
The worst experience was dealing with one travel agency. I labeled out everything I needed, and this was actually the first time I traveled. They didn't bother to notify the airlines that I was coming. They had no idea I needed any assistance to transfer from my chair onto the plane, and it was quite a mess up there.
And what date would you like to depart?
Travel agencies don't seem to have a general understanding of what accessibility means.
Most travel agents have never been taught how to accommodate travelers with disabilities. Few travel schools include the needs of persons with disabilities in their curriculum.
Most of them going through school haven't really dealt with people in wheelchairs or any disabilities.
Tatiana Kaskarova and Minkir Anafsagad are students at the International Institute of Travel in Toronto. They reflect on attitudes they had towards people with disabilities not long ago.
The sick people, you know, you always feel sorry for the sick people, and you know, you wish they will be the healthier ones.
You don't get exposed when something like this when you're from Africa, because if somebody is disabled, he stays home and never goes out.
I love traveling, and that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to go through in the travel industry at school, because I could learn more about it, learn the kind of the ins and outs of the travel industry, and I could design my own travel a lot easier. And then again, I really want to get into the field so that I can help other people in wheelchairs to make their traveling experiences much more enjoyable.
No cheating.
My teacher, Tamara, asked me if I would say a few words about my experiences and the things that people should know as travel agents.
A lot of people don't know how people with disabilities want to be handled or what's best for them, and Michael's so open to share it with the class that he took the opportunity to do so, and they really appreciated it.
I talked to them a little bit about my own disability, how it happened, like it being a diving accident, explained to them that my disability and my needs are different than somebody else's in a wheelchair, that I explained to them what I do when I go to a travel agency to book a trip, how I lay out all my needs, how I explain that in the hotels I need wider doorways, I need a bigger bathroom, space beside the toilet and everything, things like that. I explained to them that it's very important for them to ask questions of the person booking, just to make sure that they really get a good understanding of what the person needs. For instance, Colombia. A few years back, I was really interested in visiting Cartagena, and it ended up that I tried finding a hotel accessible in Cartagena, and there was none.
Besides being unaware of travel requirements, many travel agents don't know about accessible resorts, such as Eaglewood Camp.
Eaglewood Camp, it was designed by a retired nurse, and she wanted to do something for people with disabilities. And she took her own money and started building a summer camp up by Pefferlaw. And she has a couple cottages that are fully accessible, with wheel-in showers, the whole works. And there's like a man-made lake full of trout, cement path through the bush. Everything is completely accessible. She really outdid herself on that. It's a great place to go and relax. You get back into nature and you get out of the hum of the city. And it's really, really enjoyable.
Well, I know now a little bit better what Michael's needs are, and I can teach that to my future students. He's really given me a lot of insight into what exactly his disability is and how he likes to be treated, how other people treat him with his disability, and I can incorporate that into how I teach my students how they should handle the people with different disabilities.
Since meeting Michael Gamble, Tatiana Kashkarova no longer views people with disabilities as being sick. Now they are potential customers.
I never thought about that, how disabled people can travel. Now at least I know, it's possible, and not everywhere, but in, some places, yes, it is possible. So now if I'll meet people like this, I can help them and find something for them too, Let them enjoy life the same as we do.
Well, obviously, if I have a client who is disabled and would like to visit certain destinations, obviously find out if it is accessible to them and point out the best locations where they can visit the places they want to and enjoy their vacation.
Society, the way they look at disabled people is changing as we're becoming more and more visible. They're recognizing that we are a valuable part of society and we can do things, we can work, we can go out, we can enjoy the same thing as anybody else can.
Michael Gamble will be graduating later this month. Some of his future plans include designing accessible tours. He hopes to include destinations such as an African safari. If you're planning to travel in Canada this summer, it's worth contacting provincial ministries of tourism. They often have brochures which include information on accessible accommodations. We'll be back in a moment. Today's program raises many questions about society's perceptions about people with disabilities. Many assume that persons with disabilities have a poor quality of life because they do not fit into a narrow definition of what is normal. This assumption leads to some basic questions. For example, what is normal? In the case involving the wrongful life lawsuit, how do we define a wrongful life? And what is a rightful life? Several of these issues have previously been addressed by science fiction writers, but yesterday's fiction is today's reality. These issues are now being posed in precedent-setting court cases. For the future, many of these questions may be sidestepped by rapid advances in genetic technology. As a society, do we risk barging ahead as though we know the answers, even before we've asked the critical questions? We'd like to know your thoughts on the subject. Please write to us. Our address is coming up in a moment. That's our program for this week. I'm Ming Wong.
And I'm Bill McQueen. See you again next week. You can write to us at the Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W 1E6. That's Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W 1E6. This program is brought to you in part by the Royal Bank of Canada, serving Canadians for 126 years, one customer at a time.